Okay, let's dig into this. Have you ever looked at something everyone accepts as historical fact and
Yeah.
just felt something was off? Like, is that really how it went down?
Oh, absolutely. History is full of those moments if you look close enough.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a theory that's, well, it's incredibly radical. It challenges centuries of history, especially Russian history, and this whole idea of the Mongol Yoke.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how certain stories just become the story, set in stone.
Exactly.
But our sources today, mostly looking at Anatoly Fomenko's work, specifically the Horde from Pacific to Atlantic, and some overviews, they paint a completely different picture.
Yeah, they suggest things we take for granted, even basic terms and events, might actually be, well, deliberate fabrications. Historical fakes, essentially.
It's a bold claim, to say the least.
Right. So our mission here is to explore this alternative history, what they call the New Chronology. We're going to unpack the claims. And fair warning to you listening, this might make you question a lot about medieval Russia.
Definitely buckle up for this one.
So let's start with the version we all know, the mainstream view.
Right. 13th century invasion. Nomadic tribes from Mongolia sweep in.
And Russia spends centuries under their political and military thumb. The Mongol Yoke, that's the standard narrative, right?
That's the one. But the new chronology just throws that right out the window.
How so?
Its core claim is stunning. The Mongolian Horde. It wasn't a foreign invasion force.
Okay. So what was it then?
It was, and I quote, merely the Russian army.
Wait, the Russian army, not invaders.
That's the assertion. And it gets deeper. The word Mongol itself is redefined.
Go on.
The theory says it didn't mean people from, the area north of China, which, by the way, didn't really exist as Mongolia until the 20th century.
Yeah.
Instead, Mongol supposedly meant Great One, Mogallion.
So not an ethnicity, but a title, like the Great Horde.
Kind of, yeah. Which reframes the whole thing. If they weren't foreign nomads, but maybe Russia's own powerful military class, it changes the story from conquest to something internal.
Right. So this leads them to say, what exactly about the invasion?
That there was no such thing as the Tartar and Mongol invasion followed by 2 centuries of slavery. It just didn't happen like that. Instead, these Tartars and Mongols were, get this, the actual ancestors of the modern Russians.
Wow. Okay. So if it wasn't an invasion, what was happening?
The picture painted is of an ancient Russian state that was apparently bilingual Russian and Arabic spoken freely, with a dual government structure, civil and military.
And the hordes.
They're described as professional armies. Lifelong conscription, the blood tax idea maybe fits here.
So they're invasions.
Were actually internal actions. Punitive operations, the source calls them, against regions trying to skip out on taxes.
Like putting down tax revolts, basically.
That seems to be the implication. And connecting this to the bigger picture, the source argues the whole yoke theory wasn't ancient history, but a later invention.
Invented by who and why?
By the historians working for the Romanov dynasty who came to power later. The argument is the Romanovs needed to legitimize their rule. And part of that meant demonizing the previous power structure, the Horde.
Who in this theory were loyal to the old dynasty.
Exactly. Loyal to the old Russian dynasty. So the Romanovs painted them as savage invaders.
But Fomenko says they were actually.
The protectors of the state and mostly ethnic Slavs.
That turns everything upside down. And then there's this point about the Mongol capital.
Right. The source emphasizes that historians still can't pinpoint any actual Mongol capital city near the Gobi Desert where tradition places it.
So if the yoke theory was fabricated and these details don't add up, I mean, what does that do to our understanding of Russian origins? It's fundamental.
It really is. It suggests the foundations might be built on sand.
Okay, let's get into some more specifics here. The tribute money paid to the Horde.
Yeah, the new chronology says forget tribute like a conquered nation pays. It was just
Taxes.
taxes for what? A tax paid by the people in order to keep a regular army, tied up with recruitment, military service, kind of like they say practices in Turkey up until the 17th century.
So internal funding for a standing army, not paying off a foreign master.
Precisely. Which means the whole conquest of Russia by the Mongols and the Tartars is labeled figmental. Didn't happen that way.
What did happen then in the 14th century?
An internal process. Consolidation of Russian principalities. The power of the Khans, who they equate with czars, growing stronger.
Okay. And they connect this Horde army to the Cossacks.
Get this, yeah. The source suggests that remnants of the regular Russian army, Horde, have survived until our day, still known under the name of the Cossacks.
So the Cossacks are like the descendants of this original Russian Horde army.
That's the theory. And that they lived all over Russia, not just on the borders. Zaporozhye Cossacks were apparently called Horde Cossacks before the 16th century. They even suggest Cossack comes from skatat, to ride.
Interesting linguistic link there. What about the word Tartar?
Well, according to this theory, Western documents sometimes just use Tartar to mean Russians.
Really? Like who?
They mention white Tartars in some French documents having Slavic names like Gukia and Maria. And even before the supposed conquest, they claim Mongolian troops already included Russians under their own leader, Plaskinia.
So Tartar wasn't necessarily an ethnic group from far away.
Maybe more like a term for people associated with the horde structure. And they point to specifics, like the Hungarian king's letter to the Pope about Batu Khan's army.
What did it say?
It listed the troops as exclusively Slavic tribes, Russians, Brutniki, Bulgarians. No mention, the source says, of faraway invaders from a distant land near the Chinese border.
And Plano Carpini in Kiev.
Same thing, basically. He visited Kiev after it was supposedly conquered by Mongols, right? But his account mentions Russian military commanders, not Mongol governors.
So putting this together, Tartar might be a broader term. The Horde army, largely Russian. It definitely clashes with that image of, hordes of savage nomads sweeping across the land. Especially if their core numbers were small and the bulk of the army was local Russians.
It presents a very different military and political reality.
Okay, this next point seems, contradictory to the standard narrative. The Orthodox Church.
Ah, yes. This is a really interesting one. The source highlights a strange alliance, if you believe the invasion story.
How so?
Apparently, right from the start, an Orthodox church was built in the Khan's headquarters, and Orthodox churches popped up everywhere the Horde governed.
That does seem odd for foreign pagan invaders, doesn't it?
It gets stranger. Metropolitan Cyril, the head of the church, moved from unconquered Novgorod to Kiev, supposedly under Mongol rule, specifically to restore the all-Russian church hierarchy.
And the Horde, allowed this.
Allowed it. According to the source, they granted the Metropolitan a great many privileges. Tax exemptions, church lands flourished. And most Russian monasteries, they claim, were founded during this Mongolian era, with lots of Cossacks, remember, the supposed Horde soldiers taking vows there after service.
Which would seem
perfectly natural, the source says. If the Horde was the state's own military arm, soldiers retiring into monasteries supported by the state they served.
But absolutely bizarre if they were foreign oppressors.
Exactly. That's the core question Fomenko raises here. If the Mongols were really pagan invaders, why on earth would they support and privilege the Orthodox Church like this?
The source says this evidence is most bizarre indeed under the traditional view.
But makes perfect sense if the Horde was the Russian army, part of the Russian state.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. To appearances. Clothing.
Right. This one is visually striking. Turbans.
Turbans in Russia.
Apparently so. They point to a 1671 German engraving of Stepan Razin, the famous Cossack rebel.
Yeah.
And he's wearing a turban.
Okay. Maybe just him. An outlier.
The source says no. It claims great princes of Russia and their courtiers used to wear turbans as well.
Seriously? Is there evidence for that?
They cite medieval engravings in Herberstein's Notes on Moscovia, likely a later edition, and an old map of Moscow from 1683 showing figures in turbans.
So the claim is turbans were common Russian headwear until the 17th century.
That's the assertion. They even connect the Russian word chalma, turban, to chelo, forehead, and note it was a custom shared with Turkey.
Russian princes in turbans. That's definitely not in the paintings we usually see. It suggests a much closer cultural link with the East, with Turkey, than is usually portrayed.
A more interconnected world, perhaps? Makes you wonder what other cultural exchanges got written out or downplayed later on.
So this all feeds into a larger hypothesis about Russia itself.
Exactly. The new chronology goes further, suggesting medieval Mongolia and Russia were really the same state.
Same state. Wow. And therefore,
Russia was never conquered by any foreign invaders. It was all internal evolution in politics.
And that dynasty, Ivan Kalitsa's line, from the 14th to 16th centuries.
They identify that as the Horde dynasty. But crucially, a Russian dynasty, not foreign occupiers.
Okay, so the big break comes later.
With the Great Strife, the Civil War in the early 17th century, that ended the Horde epoch, according to this view.
And the Romanovs come in?
Right. And as we mentioned, they needed to solidify their power.
How?
By demonizing the old Horde dynasty.
Which included groups like
the Crimean Khans, various Cossack clans. Basically, their rivals and the remnants of the old power structure.
And this theory even talks about geography changing.
Yeah, this is pretty wild. Geographical shifts. They claim the name Mongolia itself kind of migrated east on the maps over time.
Migrated.
Yeah, and the people living there now were sort of retrospectively designated to be Mongolian.
Yeah.
And the name Siberia supposedly followed suit, shifting eastwards too, like history being rewritten on the map itself.
That's a lot to take in. And it connects to Novgorod, right?
Yeah.
This idea of shifting locations.
It does. This is fascinating. The identity of historical Novgorod the Great.
The famous trading city.
Right. But the source argues that the city we call Novgorod today, Novgorod upon Volkhov, that's not the original famous one.
Why not?
Geographically inconvenient for major trade routes, they say. And the archaeology there supposedly doesn't back up its status as a massive medieval trade hub.
So, where was the real Novgorod the Great, according to Fomenko?
The hypothesis points to Yaroslav.
Yaroslavl. Why there?
Better location for trade, apparently. It was home to a big fair, the Moloskaya Fair, and it had the Yaroslav's court, which they say was the actual Kremlin of Novgorod the Great.
So Novgorod the Great wasn't even a single city?
Possibly not. The term Lord Novgorod the Great, Gospodin Veliki Novgorod, might have referred to a whole cluster of cities in the Yaroslav region.
Like Yaroslav, Rostov, Kostroma.
Vladimir, Suzdal, Mologa, Pereyaslav. Yeah, an agglomeration. They even point to Scandinavian sources calling Novgorod a land of cities, which could fit this idea.
And the famous Novgorod icon.
Identified as the icon of Yaroslavl. And the art styles, they argue, link Novgorod more closely to Moscow than to nearby Pskov, which you might expect otherwise.
Okay, so digging deeper into this Novgorod case.
Yeah.
The city on the Volkhov River, the one we call Novgorod today.
The source dismisses it as a relatively recent settlement of minor importance back in the 16th, early 17th century. Just an okolitok, like a parish settlement.
And its identification as the great historical Novgorod.
A deliberate distortion by the Romanovs in the 17th century, the theory claims, to fit their new version of history.
And they point to archaeology there, anomalies.
Yes. Things like wooden pavements dated to the 15th century, much later than the supposed 10th century peak. And this weird 400-year gap.
The gap.
Yeah, finding older layers, then basically nothing between the 10th and 15th centuries, then layers resume. It's like, where did those 4 centuries go? Unlike older periods, which show continuous layers, very strange archaeologically speaking.
Right, and there's this building, the faceted chamber.
Yes. Supposedly a 15th century masterpiece, mentioned in chronicles, but the source includes a photo. And it looks like a very ordinary house of the 17th and 18th century. Crucially, no actual facets on the walls, unlike the famous one in Moscow.
So the New Chronology sees it as
a clumsy fake, an attempt to prop up the Romanov story by just sticking a plaque with an old date on a much newer building.
But the real bombshell seems to be about a specific document find.
Oh yeah, the birch bark document. This is a key piece of their argument against standard dating.
What was found?
A piece of birch bark with a drawing of St. Barbara. Mainstream historians Yanin and Zalizniak dated it using dendrochronology tree rings from the layer it was found in.
To when?
To the first third of the 11th century. Very ancient.
Okay, seems straightforward. But
here's the kicker, according to Fomenko, the birch bark itself has a date scratched onto it.
A date from when it was written?
Yes. It reads 7282 since Adam, which translates, using the standard conversion, to 1774 AD.
1774, that's the late 18th century, not the 11th.
Exactly. And the handwriting style, Fomenko argues, matches 18th century script, not 11th.
So how does an 18th century document end up in an 11th century archaeological layer? That's the crucial question, isn't it?
That's the question the New Chronology hammers home. How is that possible if the standard dating methods are correct?
What's their explanation for using birch bark so late?
They argue it wasn't just an ancient practice. People used it much more recently, even mid-20th century in places like Siberia for tax records, or by partisans in WWII. Why? Because paper was expensive or unavailable.
Makes sense.
And they extend this, claiming lots of supposed ancient documents like birch bark finds in England attributed to ancient Romans might also be much later, maybe 15th, 17th century, perhaps left by, they speculate, Cossack troops of this large Eurasian Great Mongolian Empire.
So the implication is huge. Many ancient documents might be centuries younger than we think, and dating methods like dendrochronology or stratigraphy are either flawed or have been manipulated.
That's the core of their challenge to conventional historical methodology. And they note that when this specific 1774 date issue was raised, the response from mainstream historians, according to the source, didn't directly refute the date analysis, but offered more general criticisms of Fomenko's overall approach, calling it scholastic.
Okay, so zooming out again, this theory paints a picture of a much larger, interconnected empire, doesn't it? Even involving Turkey.
Yes, it suggests a much deeper historical tie between Russia and Turkey, hypothesizing that maybe there was an epoch when both Russia and Turkey had constituted part of the same empire.
The same empire. When did they split?
Before their falling out in the 17th century, the source even claims some Arabic chroniclers saw the Horde as a Russian state, calling Russia the orthodox part of the Mongolian Turkish Empire.
Wow. Are there examples given of this closeness?
Yeah, things that seem odd now, like Sultan Murad signing a compact of love and friendship with Muscovites in 1613, or the Russian Patriarch in 1619 apparently demanding Don Cossacks go fight for the Turkish army.
That sounds completely backwards to how we usually think of their relationship.
And then there's an absolutely astonishing claim about Constantinople in 1453.
The Ottoman conquest.
Right. The source claims the conquerors were actually Christian, and that an eyewitness account by Nestor Iskander was written in Russian, implying educated Russians were in Mehmet II's army, some reaching high ranks.
Christian conquerors of Constantinople, writing in Russian. That rewrites a cornerstone of world history.
It certainly does. And they bring up maps, too, like the 12th century Arab map by Al-Adrasi.
What's special about it?
Very detailed, but modern historians hardly ever refer to it, the source says. Why? Because its geography clashes with the standard view of Kievan Ros's. It maps 3 Russian capitals differently, putting Slavia near Yaroslavl on the Volga, for instance.
And these 3 Roshas.
The theory posits Greater Russia was the Golden Horde, Lesser Russia the Blue Horde, and Byelorussia the White Horde, all parts of this larger structure. This also ties back to the origin of the invasion story. Fomenko analyzes an account by a Hungarian missionary, Julian, from the 14th century.
What did Julian say?
He apparently stated the Tartars came from Gothia, which Fomenko interprets as Europe, not distant Asia, and identifies their ruler, Gurguta, as Georgi, potentially an alias for Russian figures like Yaroslav the Wise or Ivan Kalita.
So the invaders were led by Russians from Europe.
Making the invasion actually a step-by-step military unification of Russia driven from within, or at least from nearby.
Goodness. And there were surprising cultural details mentioned.
Yes, really striking ones, like Amazon convoys, female warriors or attendants, and Russian women wearing yashmaks, veils, at the Muscovite court right up until the early 17th century.
Yashmaks in Moscow.
That's the claim. Explicitly linked by historians like Zebulin, the source says, to customs borrowed from the queens of the Golden Horde. And even a 16th century map by Charles V marking Amazon VM right there in Russia between the Volga and Don rivers. Cossack lands, essentially.
So the overall picture Fomenko paints is not the Russia we learned about. It's a vast, interconnected Eurasian empire with shared customs, internal power struggles mistaken for invasions, and a history deliberately rewritten later on.
It suggests the history we get is drastically simplified, maybe intentionally distorted. Makes you wonder what else got lost or twisted.
Now, we absolutely have to stress this new chronology. It's not accepted by mainstream historians.
At all.
Not even slightly. It's universally rejected, branded as pseudoscience.
Yeah.
That's the standard academic position.
Right. What are the main criticisms? Why the rejection?
Well, critics point to huge inconsistencies with pretty much all standard dating methods.
Yeah. Like archaeological dating, dendrochronology, tree rings, paleography, handwriting analysis, numismatics, coins, carbon dating. All these methods, which generally align with each other, contradict Fomenko's timeline massively.
And there are accusations about his methods.
Yes. Critics accuse Fomenko of altering the data to improve the fit with his ideas. Basically, cherry-picking.
How so?
Violating, they say, a key rule of statistics by selecting matches from the historical record which support his chronology while ignoring those which do not.
Strong words from critics.
Very strong. Yanin, the historian involved in the Birch Park find, called Fomenko's work like the sleight-of-hand trickery of a David Copperfield. Another critic, Zalizniak, argued you could use Fomenko's methods to prove almost any random historical connection you wanted.
Are there other areas of contradiction?
Astronomy is a big one. Established astronomical records like Babylonian observations or studies of historical eclipses, they consistently back the conventional timeline, not Fomenko's compressed one.
And the dendrochronology. Fomenko claimed a break around 1000 AD.
Critics reject that, pointing to tree ring sequences that are fully anchored and go back way further, well past 10,000 BCE, without such breaks.
So given these counterarguments, why such fierce academic opposition? Is it just about the data?
Well, the source notes that some critics see more to it. They link Fomenko's views to a kind of renewed Russian imperial ideology.
Politics creeping in.
Potentially. Some see it as keeping alive an imperial consciousness and secular messianism in Russia. It even received an Abzats anti-prize in Russia for being esteemed nonsense.
And yet, it clearly resonates with some people.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned Garry Kasparov.
Yeah, the former chess champion. He apparently found some of Fomenko's ideas compelling, questioning, for example, why ancient Byzantium would just lose advanced scientific knowledge, especially military tech, if the timeline was as long as conventional history says.
It just goes to show how deeply tied history is to identity, nationalism, emotion. Challenging a core historical narrative inevitably sparks intense debate from all sides.
Absolutely. It touches nerves far beyond just academic circles.
Well, we've certainly been on a mind-bending journey today, digging into this new chronology and its challenge to the established history of Russia and the Mongol Yoke.
It's definitely a lot to process.
Whether you find these ideas compelling or completely far-fetched or somewhere in between, it's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That history, the story we tell ourselves about the past, is always being interpreted. Reinterpreted even.
Indeed. It really forces you to think about how historical facts become facts. How much is shaped by the evidence we have, how much by the evidence we don't have, or maybe evidence that's been ignored or suppressed.
Right. And how the needs of rulers, dynasties, nations, how that can influence the narrative that gets passed down as official history.
Yeah, it makes you realize how a simpler, maybe more convenient story can easily overshadow a reality that was probably much more complex, messy, and maybe even contradictory.
So the question left for you, our listener, to think about is maybe this. If a cornerstone of history, like the centuries-long Mongol Yoke, could potentially be, as this radical theory suggests, a strategic invention, well, what other historical facts might be built on shakier foundations than we realize?
What other narratives are out there, maybe hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to connect the dots in a different way? What lost histories are still waiting to be uncovered?
Something to definitely mull over.